Okay, well, welcome everybody to the LDN meeting. And we're very excited here to have Stuart Levine with us, one of our members, who's going to be doing a great presentation on powerful collaborations. So I'll let Stuart introduce himself, give you a little rundown on his background, and then we'll just jump right into it. Okay, Stuart, thanks for coming.
Great. Thank you, Bill. A pleasure to be here, and welcome to everyone who's present and all of those folks who are watching the recording. So today I'm going to spend some time talking about powerful collaborations, subtitle, The Art of Agreement, Building High-Performance Organizations. So by way of introduction, all right, I spent the first 10 years of my working career as a practicing attorney, and then I got tired of fighting with people, and I thought it was not a real good way to solve problems. I then spent 6 years inside of AT&T in the marketing department with major law firms as my clients. It was a rather extraordinary educational experience in terms of how large organizations operate. And AT&T during the time was going through some major changes. And the resources for today's presentation, number one, a book I published initially in '98 with a second edition in 2008 called Getting to Resolution, Turning in Conflict into Collaboration. Follow-up book called The Book of Agreement, which really is the foundation and the cornerstone of most of what I'm going to be talking about today. And then I co-authored a book called Collaboration 2.0, which I never thought would have as much value as it did during the pandemic. It was a book that came out of the movement in Silicon Valley in California to have tech employees work from home. So I just learned a ton about virtual work during that period of time. And lo and behold, all of a sudden we're in the pandemic and there's a great demand for a bunch of the things that I learned during that period of time. Because in the tech community, they decided that, virtual work really doesn't work that well. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. By the way, at any moment in time, any of the folks here live, please feel free to interrupt, ask a question, make a comment, whatever, all right? So we're going to talk a little bit about, I forgot to finish the introduction of myself. While I was at AT&T, I studied divorce mediation and started to do that work. And I had a lot of success with it. And after a period of time, few years, 5 years maybe, I started to move that work over into working with organizations because of my experience working in large organizations. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 some odd years, except for the recent foray into poetry, which I'll say more about a little bit later, all right? So powerful collaborations, going to talk about the why, the what, the how, and provide some actionable ideas, all right? Why, all right? Because today the world is flat. Today we've got globalization of business. Today we've got distributed teams. How we interact, produce, collaborate has changed a great deal over the past 10, 15, 20 years, all right? There's way less face-to-face communication, and a lot of work happens cross-departmentally in organizations. There's no such thing as let me alone and leave me do my job, because everybody's collaborating and working with each other all the time. So the notion is, collaborate or die as a way of being, actually. So how is it that we can do this and learn to do this well? All right. Now, one of the things that I like to talk about as a motivator, as a business case, is that there's an actual cost to conflict. When we don't collaborate well, when we don't get off together in alignment on the same page There's a cost to the conflict that pops up. There's direct cost. We have to hire expert help. There's productivity cost, which has a few elements. There's time loss. There's reduced capacity. There's opportunity cost. There's continuity cost when we have to let people go off of a team. And then there's the emotional cost of any kind of stress-related disease or injury. When you start to look at these costs of conflict, they can add up very, very quickly. Or the way I like to think about it, profit is leaking out under the door of most organizations because of the interpersonal conflict that is just so rampant in cultures. And I think it's even more present today because there's such a high level of stress that people are operating under. The changes related to working during the pandemic, the political climate we're living in, the shootings. Another way of saying it is, I think we're actually all living in a PTSD world. We're all living in a bit of a PTSD world. So there is a cost to organizations to this communication challenges. There's a cost of miscommunication, distrust, turnover, passive aggressive behavior, missed deadlines, reduced quality, silos, decreased customer satisfaction. In fact, and the reason that I'm going to talk about conflict almost as much, though not quite, as I'm going to talk about collaboration, is because they're very much two sides of the same coin. The book I wrote, Getting to Resolution, Turning Conflict into Collaboration, I used to lead with conflict, right? Now I lead with collaboration, but in order to collaborate effectively, it's just critical to get good at dealing with differences and conflict. So to kind of normalize conflict, conflict is natural. It's neither positive nor negative, it just is. It's an interference pattern of energies. Nature uses conflict to create beautiful change, beaches, canyons, mountains, pearls, all of this through geophysical activity inside of the earth. It's not really whether we have conflict in our life, it's what we do with it when it arises. And the biggest mistake I think that people make is that, and it's part of the culture, when people are facing conflict, the mindset goes to winning and losing. And essentially, winning and losing are good goals for games, but not for conflict. Learning, growing, cooperating are critical mindsets for moving through conflict. And dealing with conflict, it's rarely about who is right. It's about the mindset we bring to the situations. These are quotes from a beautiful program called The Magic of Conflict by a guy named Tom Crum, who shares his wisdom from the perspective of being an Aikido master. He actually lectures this great tape series while he's on the mat demonstrating Aikido moves. All right. So where does conflict come from? Well, I say it comes from the different observations, interpretations, feelings, and needs that people have. So the idea that different people make different observations looking at the same thing. I remember the first simple automobile case, accident case I tried as a young attorney. My client testified as to how the accident happened, and I said, that's the truth. Well, then the other driver testified, different story, but they sounded like they were telling the truth too. And then a witness told a third story about what they saw, and I scratched my head and said, we never talked about this at law school. So the idea that different perceptual systems make different observations. Um, we have different interpretations of phenomenon that are around us and words. So let's have a short meeting about this. How long is a short meeting? You know, for some people, it might be a half hour. For some people, a short meeting is a minute, right? Different feelings. We all know that feelings are generated inside of us as a result of our life history. And different people with different experience will have different feelings in the same context. And the last one is people have different needs. Some people want fame and fortune. Some people want notoriety. Some people want money. Some people want time off and lifestyle. And so when you look at conflict as to what its source is, the underlying phenomenon of individuals is very, very present. And so that's why I always say, and this, you know, reminds me of an experience I had about 25 years ago. Part of my background is I did 600 one-day seminars during a 5-year period, 1999 to the year 2000. And usually the drill was I'd fly into a city like New York and pick up a rental car and then drive, you know, from Westchester to Rockland to Long Island to North Jersey and do the same program every day. This particular week, I was working in small towns like Billings, Montana, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Every night I had to take a small plane back to the hub in Salt Lake City. After 4 days, I was exhausted, Thursday, and I'm waiting for a late plane. And I notice a woman start to feed her infant child. And the first thing she does is put a bib on the child's neck, and I couldn't believe my eyes. But finally, I'm able to focus on this bib. And what did the bib say? The bib said, "Spit happens." And I said to myself, aha, this is a message from a higher authority. In life, it's not a question of whether or not spit happens happens. Now, having said that, all right, so that my point is that conflict just shows up. And my point really is that that's the bad news, that spit happens. The good news is through learning some of the skills and techniques and tools that I'm going to share with you, and that I am sharing with you, that we can get a lot better at dealing with the.
Hey, Stuart, I do have a quick question for you. Just
Sure.
on that slide, what do you think, which one of those four do you think, well, interpretations, I guess interpretations, feelings, and needs, which one of those four is the greater source of conflict? If that's an answerable question.
Yeah, I think feelings, Bill. That's what pops up for me, because people have, you know, conflict really comes from strong emotions that people can't let go. There's a whole body of work called ego identification. You know, we become ego identified with a particular perspective. And some of that, when we have strong feelings about it, based upon personal experience, I think those are harder to let go of. And so we tend to hold on to the position that we've taken. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Mm-hmm. So just a little bit of humor. You have much to learn, my son. You can't say on with his head after you've said off with his head, which reminds me a little bit of the greatest piece of mentoring that I ever received. Was my then senior law partner, who was about 65 at the time. I thought he was ancient. I was in my 20s. He's a young man from my perspective now. But he took me aside one day, put his arm around me. He said, "Stuart, remember this. Somebody told me this when I was about your age. You cannot unpunch someone." And I said immediately, I said, that's a keeper. That's a good one. And we've all been there when, as the words were coming out, we were wishing that we can kind of reel those words back. But, you know, very often we react as opposed to respond. Okay, so collaboration, very high value. This was a survey done a number of years ago. And collaboration is a key driver of organizational performance. It's twice as significant as market opportunities, meaning new products, and 5 times as significant as the market environment, meaning competition. So collaboration impacts the gold standards of profitability, profit, and sales. Pretty important and pretty amazing. Now, conflict and collaboration, 2 sides of the same coin. 2 sides of the same coin. We get good at resolving conflict so that we can get to the place of good, effective collaboration. Now, let's talk about some of the things that good conflict resolution / good collaboration requires. All right. So it asks of us, I think, to be emotionally intelligent, to be conscious communicators, to value collaboration, to engage in what I've called resolutionary thinking. Resolutionary thinking. That's actually my professional identity, resolutionary. And how did I get that? I'm very proud to say I didn't pay a branding expert thousands of dollars, but a client at the end of an engagement looked at me and said, "You're a resolutionary. That's what you are." And so I put that on my business card back around 1991. Wow. As a matter of fact, it's an interesting phenomenon. When the iPad first came out, if you went to the Apple website, there was a headline, resolutionary, different perspective. Some people were encouraging me to go after Apple for appropriating my my brand. I decided it wouldn't be such a good idea. All right, but I'll share what resolutionary thinking is. Crafting good agreements for results, which is the core of what I'd love you to take away today, and choosing to change behavior, to do things a little bit differently. All right, so let's talk about a little bit about the what. What are the critical things that we want to take away from this program? So collaboration is a holistic process. It involves people, it involves technology, it involves process. And we see the Venn diagram, virtual teams there in the middle, people, process, and technology, all of these things critical. And obviously today we're going to focus on the people part and some of the process part. Right? Conscious communication, being aware of what it is you say, recognizing and realizing that every word counts, that people are impacted by the language we use, people are impacted by the nonverbal skills that we use. So having that level of awareness. As I said, we can't take back our words, okay? We cannot unpunch someone, all right? It involves becoming more emotional intelligent. Emotionally intelligent. The schema that Daniel Goleman, who popularized emotional intelligence, puts in place, having a good sense of who you are, self-knowledge, having a good sense of what's going on inside of you at any moment in time, self-awareness, being able to regulate your own behavior. Self-motivation, the strategic aspect of emotional intelligence. What's important to you? What are you trying to achieve? Because in some ways that guides a lot of the social interaction that comes out of emotional intelligence. Empathy, care and concern for others. And social skills, ability to form teams, ability to move through conflict, ability to communicate. All of these things are kind of important aspects of the ability to collaborate and collaborate well. My favorite articulation of empathy is something that I've had on my email signature for a number of years, a couplet from the poet Longfellow. If you knew the secret history of those you would like to punish, you would find a sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all your hostility. There's a story over there, and we need to do our best to understand who it is that we're working with. Get to know them a bit as an individual, understand what's in their background, what's in their history. Now, how is it that we engage with others effectively? And it's interesting, I'm going to share a model with you in a bit about moving through conflict. It's a dialogue model, a conversational model. And I remember after my first book came out, I said, geez, this is a really good conversational model. But what I didn't write about was, so how is it that people need to be in order to converse well with each other? What's that behavior need to be beyond playing nice in the sandbox? Okay. So some of the critical things that I've come to understand that make up a communication toolbox is recognizing differences. That when we're talking to somebody else, even though they may be in Western dress and speaking the English language, they have different wiring. You know, we all know what the things that are revealed by a Myers-Briggs or a DISC assessment or an insight inventory. So recognizing that people are different. The difference between responding and reacting. The use of I statements when we communicate. The idea of designing our communication to think about what do we need to let them know in order to generate a feeling that will move them into action. We want to soften our communication. Be aware of the nonverbal aspects. Never escalate if things kind of start to get heating. You know, don't bark back at barking dogs. You want to bring things down. The notion of mirroring and identifying how it is that we create connection and relationship. Mirroring is the nonverbal. Identifying is finding some common ground, something we have in common. It's one of my favorite is Martin Buber, object and subject. Having subjective relationships where we know who people are, a little bit about their background, versus just thinking of people as objects, the tech guy, the VP. And making sure that there's always feedback. And by that, I don't mean critiquing, but I mean that there is interaction where we're giving people an idea of how what they said is meeting us. So those are kind of the critical highlights of my communication toolbox. But what's the most powerful and critical tool? Listening, right? How is it that we engage with others? Are we doing our best to comprehend and understand what it is that they have to say? I'll stop for any questions or comments or thoughts at this point in time. I'm kind of, in some ways, setting the table for the real meat that I want to share with you.
How do you, to move from conflict to collaboration, it takes two people, and sometimes it is impossible to get beyond the conflict, isn't it?
Sometimes that happens, okay? My barometer for that is if people are actually talking, you know, and I've spent time as I'm actually one of the first, quote, certified employment mediators. This goes back to the late 1980s, where a guy was developing this body of work. So I've worked with couples, I've worked in employment situations, and usually when people are coming together, they really want to get it resolved. They want to leave it behind them. Why? Because they realize that they are paying an emotional cost and a productivity cost. But you're absolutely right, Bill. Sometimes there are situations of intractable conflict where people just won't talk to each other. The first example that comes to mind about that, it's interesting, it was about 20 years ago. I was doing a program for the Federal Executive Service in Washington, a 2-day program on conflict and collaboration. And at the end of the program, there were about 75 people. All of a sudden, these 4 guys in white uniforms were walking up the aisle towards me, and they were naval officers. And they said, Stuart, this is great, but where you really need to go do some work is down the block at Congress. I mean, those people are they're just terrible. They just won't talk to each other. And I actually tried to get into that context, and they weren't interested. And we all know it's a terrible thing to watch. We have framed everything as right and wrong and win and lose and fault and blame. And we watch TV all the time, and we see great examples of argutainment in what is supposed to be news. So, mindset, resolutionary thinking that we bring to situations of conflict are just very important. So I say that in order to be a good collaborator, you need to have a mindset of abundance, that there's enough for everybody. You need to think in terms of whether or not the process you're using is efficient or not. Does it foster resolution? If we bring our creativity to situations, perhaps everybody can get their needs met. Years ago, as part of my job delivering programs, was selling cassette tapes. And there was one particular program that I always avoided because it was called The Secrets of Power Negotiating. And I thought it was going to be about getting over on people. And when I finally listened to the tape, it was a British guy named Roger Dawson. The first thing he said was, the most powerful form of negotiating is to find out what they want and figure out how to give it to them. And I went, aha, all right. We can only get there if we allow our creativity to kind of come through. Being open in our communication, thinking long-term, recognizing that we need to honor people's feelings, full disclosure, get everything on the table. And these last two are my favorites in moving through conflict and difficulty. To think of it as a learning experience, teaching and learning and teaching and learning and teaching and learning. They're teaching you about their perspective, and you're teaching them about your perspective. And then we can apply creativity. And responsibility is conflict, I've come to understand, lives inside of us as an emotional presence. And so you cannot give it away to somebody else to resolve. You need to kind of step up and engage and resolve it. All right. Now, here's my model. I'll give you another version of this later. It's a conversational model, as I've said. All right. So resolution is where we're in a place of alignment. We're in a place of alignment. Everything is resolved. The rocket ship is taken off. But lo and behold, because of the sources of conflict, over there at about 1:30, spit happens. Now, at 3 o'clock, what do we bring to the conversation after spit happens? Our attitude of resolution, resolutionary thinking, the mindset. And then, in order to get through this, everybody's get the opportunity to tell their story at about 4:30. And then after people tell stories, you get some sense of what's going on here, what might be fair to everyone. Now, the biggest challenge is the proclivity towards jumping to solution too quickly, when there is still a lot of emotional baggage that's still present. And so in some ways, for simple stuff, yeah, you can resolve it right here. But for more complex, where there's a little bit of heat involved, you need to get current and complete. You need to drill down into the emotion. I got a way to do that, but it's a little bit broader than today's presentation. And then you get to some new principle of agreement. What's the future going to look like? Will the team persist? Is the marriage going to continue? And then you can create the details of a new agreement, and then you're back in a place of resolution. What I want to point out about this is what you get when you resolve a conflict is a new agreement. If you happen to go to court because you can't resolve a conflict, the judge tells you what your new agreement is. So I always like to say, geez, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all get beyond the emotion of conflict and just say, this isn't working, is it? We need an agreement. Drop all of that emotional stuff and just come to some new agreement. But we're not there in terms of our emotional evolution, right? Okay, so how do you—
Stuart,
Yeah.
just a little surprised on the model. I don't see listening.
Well, this is just a conversational model in the sense of the progression of what needs to be talked about, kind of the how we talk, okay? There. That's a little bit of the how we talk, okay? And the listening, but this is just kind of the conversational process. But you raise a good point, Brent. Okay, you raise a good point, and I will keep that in mind. Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. So, laws of agreement. We collaborate with others by having explicit and implicit agreements, that we live in a sea of agreements. It's a lens that we can look through. We have unspoken agreements with the municipality that collects our garbage and provides fire service. We don't think of those as agreements, but there are unspoken implicit agreements. Most of us never learned what goes into a good collaboration. What do you need to talk about at the beginning? Agreements are a source of productivity. They create a shared vision and a roadmap. They improve chances for success. They enable more masterful capacity for creating agreements. When conflict happens, it's an opportunity for creativity. And when we resolve conflicts, we need a new agreement. All right, so these are the laws of agreement. It's kind of in the background. So what is it that we need to talk about when we first start a new collaboration of any kind? And one of the things that I want to say about this is most people operate ready, fire, aim, as opposed to ready, aim, fire. Ready, fire, aim. We live in a world where there's such an incredible thrownness, a proclivity to be in action quickly. And people won't take the time to get clear about their level of alignment before they begin. And what I suggest is having a conversation that looks at, so what's our intent and vision? What do we want to create here? What role is each person going to play? And do we have everybody we need to create that vision? What promises does everyone agree to do? What are you going to contribute to this collaboration? Time and value. How long are we in this? And what's the value that each person is putting in and getting out? Because we all know if people don't perceive that they're getting out as much as they put in, performance stops. Metrics, measures of satisfaction. Very often conflict arises because some people think that they achieved what they set out to, and some people don't. So we need some very specific metrics for how we're going to measure whether or not we got the results that we wanted to. Concerns and fears. So often we sit around the conference table and we're going to do a project with George. And oh, I remember the last time I worked with George, he didn't do what he said he was going to do. So concerns and fears give people the opportunity, the permission to actually talk about what their concern and fear is. Renegotiation. We know what we know at the beginning. We don't know what we don't know. As we find out things, we need to renegotiate what our agreement is. Consequences, plus and minus, what's really at stake? Positive and negative here in this. For the individuals involved, for the communities they're trying to serve. How will we resolve conflict? Because we all know that spit happens. And do we have agreement? After we talked about these 10 elements, are we aligned? Is there trust? Do we want to move forward? So in some ways, this period of getting to agreement is also a time of, can I work with these people? Do I want to work with these people? So if we were doing a workshop, what I would ask you to do right now is to make an agreement with yourself about something you've been procrastinating. One, to get you familiar with these 10 elements, but for you to see how you can break down what seemed to be an overwhelming project. And then you start to work with others. If I do this in-house, I actually have a specific project where I have people talk about what it is that they want to create together. So, eyes, ears, and heart. Always remember the communication elements of the Chinese character for communication. Eyes, ears, and heart. Great quote from Helen Keller: alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And there we have alignment, people kind of all pulling in the same direction. All right, so I'll stop for a minute. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question because I was scribbling so fast I didn't get the title of the slide. The 10 elements, what was the title on that slide? Yeah, that one, essential elements. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
My question would be, Stuart, when do you need to bring in a mediator? When do you need to bring in someone to help you? And what would be the signs that now you need to do that?
Stuck. When you're stuck, when you're stuck and you can't move forward. Okay. And usually it's because someone is, being intractable. I mentioned the phenomenon earlier, ego identification. All right. And really, and it's an amazing ego identification, given my background as a lawyer, ego identification is present both with the individual principals, but it's also a great phenomenon for lawyers. Lawyers become ego identified with their particular case, and they can't let go, and they start to take it personally. So, collaboration and conflict. What's your own attitude? Okay. What's your attitude towards conflict? Where did it come from? Is it serving you? Did you ever make a choice about it? All right. What I like to do with this little inquiry is recognize that a lot of people are just conflict averse. and they've never made a choice that in order to operate in an organizational world, they need to get good at dealing with it, either as an operative or as a manager. I was doing a program for the Navy, and there was a female naval officer in her mid-30s, and in response to these questions, her mind went, wow, that's really interesting. In my professional life, I'm like my dad, the admiral, and I just kind of bowl over people. And in my personal life, I'm like my mother. I'm very kind of meek and timid. And, and my immediate response was, well, how's that working for you? And she recognized that, she needed to do a little bit of thinking about where to go with that. What's the culture of your organization? And one of my heroes in terms of organizational culture was a guy named Max Dupree, who spoke of covenantal relationships. He was the CEO of the Herman Miller Company for many years, wrote some great books, Leadership Jazz, Leadership as an Art. And Max talked about covenantal relationships, which I like to think that my 10 elements lead to, meeting of mind and meeting of heart. But to me, culture, it's a fuzzy word, but organizations essentially, the culture is held in relationships, and relationships are a function of implicit and explicit agreements. So if you want to change the culture, make your agreements more explicit about how people will be with each other inside of that culture. So what's the culture of your organization, of your marriage, of your team? Just some things to think about. What's the state of your agreements? One of the things I found is that if there is conflict, there's usually an incomplete or a non-existent agreement. What's the state of your agreements with your team, your manager, your organization? So remember the laws of agreement. Remember the cycle of resolution. Here's a little bit more of a comprehensive cycle of resolution. I was toying with the idea today of doing a presentation with just this slide only, just this slide only, and talking about this model. Because essentially what this model is in terms of conversational process, a lot of the things in the cycle of resolution are touchstones. There are actually just 3 key elements of interactive conversation for moving through conflict. Get the facts on the table by telling stories, deal with the emotions by getting current and complete, and make an agreement for the future, the new agreement. But I obviously decided not to do that, but I wanted you to have this. But this is the comprehensive, cycle of resolution. So to create powerful collaborations, it's real important to strengthen our skills. All right. Some critical things: value differences, develop levels of emotional intelligence, allow the emergence of what I call third body, meaning 1 + 1 = 3 or 4 or 5. It's the product of 2 or more people coming together and how that becomes expansive, right? Natural genius: each person has a different perspective because of who they are as an individual. Rather than bring their job description with them all the time, bring that whole person into the organization. Shared vision, resolutionary thinking, and be aware of nonverbal communication, which is just such a powerful piece. So that's where to find me, and that's what I have for you today. Except I do have a poem, okay? But before I close with the poem, let's open it up for any questions, comments, thoughts.
That was fantastic. Thank you. That was really, really great. Great stuff. A question I have for you is, do you use any of the conflict assessments, conflict style assessments, and how do you think is the best way to use those?
Yeah, so I do. I think the most important lesson that's in those is to get people to realize that they have choices, that they have choices in terms of the strategy that they choose to engage, you know, and that to make them realize that collaboration is the highest level of dealing with conflict, but you can't always do it. And in certain different circumstances, a different strategy is more useful. But yeah, I use those. What I'll also do is when I've got people that are battling each other, I try to get them to be aware of the differences in their styles. So those, you know, communication style assessment instruments can be real important. I mean, you know, one of the things that I actually took away from AMA was using the insight inventory, which is used in a lot of their programs, and it's a very easy, simple, down and dirty assessment instrument. You know, to me, Myers-Briggs or DISC, they're both a little bit more complex, but I like to use the insight inventory when two people are battling with each other. Yeah.
How do you deal with a constant competer? How do you talk them down and get them to think about having some options?
I think that the critical piece is to get them to recognize that they great. So there's a great statement. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And I think, you know, to make people realize that they may be doing themselves a disservice in the long run. That being said, that's the major problem with people not wanting to sit down and do the work on the front end. There was a great old oil filter commercial for Fram oil filter, and the tagline was "Pay me now or pay me later."
Right.
Meaning put in the work at the front end before you're off in action to create alignment and to create a shared vision. Or otherwise, you're just going to end up in conflict, and you're going to have to pay me later to come in and help you untangle things. Yeah.
And how important is it for you to put those agreements in writing?
Oh, it's important. And the reason that it's important, it becomes like a constitution for the project, for the organization, for the team. And it's something that it's not written in stone, and it's not something that you just do it once and forget about it. My suggestion always is that every 3 months, you need to revisit and take a look at this and, you know, see where you are and make an assessment. How are you doing with all of those things that you articulated at that moment in time?
Nice. Nice.
So I'm looking at the clock,
Yeah,
but I want to read a poem, you know,
please.
from my new collection, Pilgrim's Path, Morning Practice for Seekers. And it's called Agreements. Okay. Agreements all over. Without them, you are a rover. Implicit framing collaborations, explicit results beyond expectations. Shared vision, set a clear plan, build trust for woman and man, agreement and agreements in place, alignment and agreements in place easier to reach states of grace. Accomplish little alone, harness together, stronger than stone. Hook talents to a team with a mission, results flow from expressed joint vision. Partners with a deep covenant light you up in energy abundant. Solid ground with your team, with loved ones, express a dream. Know who you are, what you're about, align with others, stand back and shout. Be amazed with great delight. Teammates make your life bright. Results beyond what you had in mind. Life force wells up without any bind. Satisfaction fills your heart. Joining with others, life becomes art.
Fantastic.
Nice job.
Yeah, that's really great.
So the art of agreement, use it. Don't use it at your peril. Was really a pleasure to work with you today.
Thank you. And I'm
Mhm.
sure everybody's going to really love this recording. So, and thank you very much for allowing us to do that. And I hope we see you again sometime in the near future.
You will, okay? Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
I'm
Good
going to
job.
stop the recording.
Have a good day,
You
okay?
too.
Okay, bye-bye.